Today we're going to do something a little bit different. With Doug's permission, I'm going to share a conversation I had with a friend, Mike Farris, who operates a great channel called Coffee and a Mic. I encourage everyone to check that out. In this conversation, we talk about something, an idea you've probably not heard before, and it has serious implications for all of us. So Doug and I thought it was important. We're sharing the conversation here. Hope you enjoy it.
Matt Smith, good to see you. Thanks for coming back.
Good to see you, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing well. Following conversations with Doug, and crazy start of the year we're in right now. But one of the hottest things I think out there that nobody seems to be talking about is what you are laser focused on, if I may say.
Well, it's the biggest thing I think going. I mean, all this USAID stuff is super interesting. All the Doge stuff, very interesting and very satisfying to watch some of it happen. Although with the judges, now getting involved, looks like a problem. But that's interesting and very entertaining. But I don't think it's the big story. The big story has to do with the economic plan that Trump has in store for the country, and it's not something that's secret. It's something that has been well articulated by people in the Trump camp. And I think the reason that it brought to my attention the urgency of it now is because of what you see happening in the gold market. And there's a huge run on gold. So where they have massive shortages and meeting obligations in London, and the gold is moving to the US at huge numbers. And it's inexplicable because there's no retail demand. Retail doesn't get, even though gold is, up like 40% in the last 12 months, retail still thinks the smart thing to do is invest in the S&P or to buy some meme coins or some nonsense like that. I mean, gold is on a tear, and it's hitting this point where there's the futures market where basically people paper trade gold. And then there's the physical market where people actually buy and sell and take physical possession of gold. And China and other countries, other central banks, have been buying gold hand over fist for the last couple of years. Why? Because gold has served as the monetary base, like the true value for nations for a long time. I mean, it's historically the way it always was. I mean, it was that still in the US up until 1971, this was the case. Gold, especially when you get into an environment where you have monetary disorder, and you want to stabilize that disorder, gold will play an important role. China knows this. China's been preparing for it. But what's happening in the U.S. now, where there's some large buyer of gold who is taking physical possession of gold that is normally only paper traded, and it's a huge amount. It's something like 30 million ounces so far this year. It's just an enormous amount of gold. I mean, the total gold supply supposedly that the U.S. has is 261 million ounces. So this is like, it's 10% of all the gold the U.S. has is being delivered and taken possession of by somebody in the U.S. market. Now, this buyer or buyers is not price sensitive. So, and they seem to have incredibly deep pockets. So they're not price sensitive as in they're on the side of a winning trade with these paper trades with gold. Okay. They could if they just were out for profits, they would close the trade and take the profit. And as the COMEX increases margin requirements, meaning because these futures trades are very leveraged, often 30-1, but as they increase the margin requirements in order to essentially get control over that market, this buyer is not giving in. Like they have plenty of money. They plan to take physical possession of this gold. And there are some very smart people on Twitter that follow the gold market very closely. And the best hypothesis as to what's happening here is that the buyer is the U.S. Treasury, or the buyer is the Fed, and with the thought that they had a lot of gold and over time, this 261 million ounces the U.S. supposedly has that hasn't been audited in a long time, and people doubt it's there, that they're preparing for a gold audit. They're preparing to audit the gold the U.S. has, and so they're reshoring whatever gold that they've leased out over time. They're bringing it all back because it's going to serve an important monetary use very, very soon. So that this act, what's been happening with the gold market, has made me think that all of these plans that you hear from the Trump team over the last few months are actually taking shape in a way that's pretty aggressive. And if you look at what the Biden regime was doing, and I'd say basically every regime before right now, all of our fiscal problems, the monetary problems, the trade problems, all of that has basically been assumed it's an unsolvable problem. And so, especially when you look at the USAID stuff and you look at the Biden administration, it's like, okay, this train is going to go off the rails. Let's just milk as much of it as we can while we can before it crashes. I think the Trump administration has a plan, and I think they're executing that plan. And you see some of these insane things that they're doing. They look like they're insane, but they actually are part of an overall economic strategy that is going to reshape the monetary order, the global trade order, in a way that hasn't been done since 1971, since we went off the gold standard. And this has such far-reaching consequences for all Americans that I don't think that there's no other issue that's more compelling than this one to me. So what they're going to do fundamentally, and they've talked about this, the U.S. is no longer competitive because, in their words, these other countries aren't playing fair. How are they not playing fair? Well, their currencies are too low compared to the U.S. dollar. So the idea, what they need to do in order to make the U.S. competitive again, is a lot of different things. But one thing that's fundamental to it is they need to devalue the dollar. They need the dollar to be worth a lot less in its relationship with other currencies. It needs to go down to make the U.S. exports extremely competitive. I mean, right now, they put these tariffs just this week on steel and aluminum. And a lot of the steel comes from China to Canada, and it gets to Canada at lower than the cost that the U.S. can produce it. And then Canada then sort of rebrands it and sells the steel to the U.S. Okay, so why is that so much cheaper? Why can China produce that so much cheaper than we can? I think there's certainly some technological innovations. Maybe they're more efficient. Maybe they have higher productivity. That's part of it. But a big part of it, the Trump team would argue, certainly, is that their currency manipulators. Their currency is too cheap. They aren't playing fair because the U.S. dollar is too high. And see, this is a natural byproduct of something called of having a global reserve currency. It's called the Triffin's dilemma. In the Triffin's dilemma, it's like if you have the reserve currency, you have to supply a stock of currency to the world. So that makes it that it turns you into a consumer economy. And the demand on the dollar, because everyone uses it for trade, keeps that currency unnaturally high. So the U.S. is going to break that, I think intentionally. I don't think they really care about it being a world reserve currency at all. I think at this stage, they are interested in trying to reset the economic system so that the U.S. I think that they will adopt a set of policies that are not unlike the economic policies that China has. Everybody can shit on China, but China's policies over the last 30 years have produced an economic miracle. I mean, an unbelievable economic miracle. And I think we're going to model those.
So devaluation of the dollar, this happened in 1971, right, when we came off the gold standard.
Yep, it did. And it happened also in an organized way in 1985 in something called the Plaza Accord.
Let's go back to 1971 for a second. So when Nixon took us off the gold standard, what was the impact that it had on Americans, people that don't pay attention to stuff like you do, Matt? They have no idea. Inflation went through the roof?
Yeah, caused inflation to go up. Yep. I mean, that's the devaluation, okay? When the dollar's devalued, inflation rose. That's part of it. So while they criticized the Biden administration for all the inflation that occurred under the Biden administration, there's an understanding that they need to create an environment like that. One, you have to get rid of the debts. They have to be washed away by inflating them away. But there's a whole bunch of different policies that kind of work their way together to make the whole thing work. It's actually overall, it's a very complicated thing. It's not just simply about inflating it away. They want to trap the inflation in certain ways. They want to, so like in China, there are two currencies. There's a currency inside China, and then there's a currency outside China. So China's internal system is protected from all of the giant capital flows outside of global capital flows. Currently, the U.S. is a victim, you could say. Well, it's a free market, but it's in order to exact the changes that they want to make. I think I could be wrong about this, but also I'll point to some things that what they've said, what the Trump administration have said, that I think add a lot of detail to this. They need to model the same thing to make it so that all of the production, all of the proceeds of all of the commerce that China does must be brought back to China and reinvested in China. So how has their capital base grown so much over the last few decades? It's grown because of their economic policies, where the money must come here. And if you're a Chinese citizen, you can get out $50,000 a year. That's it. So they control the capital coming in and the capital going out. They have policies, an industrial policy that's designed to increase the productivity of the people there, the capital base of the people there. And ultimately, it does work out it really did improve the standard of living for people in China Trump would say, at our expense. So I think he looks at that and he goes, we need their kind of policy. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with a two-tiered dollar, an external dollar, and an internal dollar. Now, this is way out there. No one said anything like this, but I think that I think we could end up with something like that. And we'll certainly have a much more organized industrial policy. And that's the purpose of this sovereign wealth fund. People are like, what are they going to put in the sovereign wealth fund? I mean, the U.S. doesn't have anything. But there was a podcast with Howard Lutnick, who is the nominee for Secretary of Commerce. I think it was in October.
Frank Lutnick, right?
No, it's Howard Lutnick. Yeah, Howard Lutnick. And he talks about the way that they'll use that sovereign wealth fund. He's very clear about it. He says, we need to, our debt is a problem, our spending is a problem. We need to get that under control. And that's where he talked about Elon Musk and Doge. He said, but we need to work on the asset side of the balance sheet. And he says the U.S. has a huge amount of assets. And, he says, for instance, that the Interior Department should change its name to something like the Department of all the U.S. land and all the U.S. mineral rights. And he uses a specific example. Anwar, which is this oil deposit in Alaska that we haven't been able to touch because of environmental concerns, supposedly has oil as much as Saudi Arabia in this one thing. Now, the only reason that they can't do it is because of environmental regulations. So imagine if you allow Shell or whatever oil company in there to actually do some work, and and the U.S. earns a royalty on every barrel of oil that's produced from that field, instead of just, doing a license for people to have access to it. Like that dramatically changes the asset side of the ledger. Of course, you get the idea of this in the way Trump is thinking about it as a deal maker. He's thinking about it like, well, TikTok, it wouldn't exist unless I allow it. So we should get half for the American people. And you put that half of TikTok into the sovereign wealth fund. He's looking at the sovereign wealth fund as a much more taking an active role in the economic development of the U.S. And the mineral rights and resources in the U.S. will be a big part of that.
This sounds like not a bad thing, Matt. What am I?
Well, it's not a bad thing. I mean, we had no industrial policy. We basically have had nobody at the controls for a long time. The downside of this is that inflation is going to be a problem. I mean, they want inflation to occur. And but they also want to trap capital so that that inflation doesn't just cause the rise of stocks or the rise of real estate, although it will affect those and those will go up too, but that it actually then gets into wages. So you start to see big inflation. The problem is that the numbers are huge. I mean, I think ultimately we could walk out of this on a gold standard again, with gold as a reserve, and not just us. I mean, the world going back to this standard. But those numbers, if you just take the base money, that puts gold today is expensive. It's 29.30 or something like that an ounce, which is up a lot, for like I said, 40% in the last year. But this would put gold at like 21,000 an ounce, which basically means the devaluation of the dollar is going to, it's going to be 10% of what it is today.
So everyday Americans, they're going to get absolutely killed from this.
In the short term, I think that they do absolutely get killed from it. Yeah, but I think they'll support it. I actually think the appetite in America, they're not telling everyone the story, and I don't know if they will until it's really we're in the throes of it. But I think the appetite of most Americans is that something must change. First, there's the MAGA people who totally worship Trump and support whatever he'll do. But I think beyond that, everyone knows that something must change. I mean, it's like the fourth turning idea. Totally new ideas will be accepted, completely new and unexpected. But this is not a free market, and it's certainly one where people could get, people will lose a lot of purchasing power in this process. So it has lots of downsides, but and you also don't know if you can get the other countries to go along with it. Now, actually, here's the thing. So what's Trump doing with these tariffs? Trump says he's doing it because to stop fentanyl, right? That's just one of his reasons, or illegal immigration. Now, I think he wants to stop fentanyl. I think he wants to stop illegal immigration. I think he's demonstrated that he's serious about those things. But that's not the fundamental motivation. The motivation is this economic reset, this monetary reset. That's the main thing. And all you have to do is look at the way that tariffs were used in the past. Everyone remembers that if you pay attention to these things, that 1971, Nixon closed the gold window, officially made the dollar not redeemable for gold anymore. That same day, he instituted a universal 10% tariff on everything that was imported into America. Why did he do that? Because he wanted the cooperation of other countries in the devaluation of the dollar. He wanted them to participate in it because there's lots of things that the individual countries can do to defend their currency. And he didn't want that to happen. He wanted their participation. So he used the hammer of the 10% tariff to force compliance. And ultimately, they had something like that came out of the Smithsonian agreement where they agreed to a certain level, that they would manage the currency exchange rates for. So, and the same thing happened in 1985 at the Plaza Accord. And essentially there was this bill rolling through Congress, the enemy then was Japan, not China, and there was all of this anti-Japan, Japan's taking all their jobs, they produce shitty things. It's exactly the same thing that we hear today about China. And so there's threat of this tariff, plus knowing that the Treasury Secretary under Nixon just, did it arbitrarily without an act of Congress in the past, that threat got everyone to the table for the Plaza Accord to create something new. Now they're going to do something new called the Mar-a-Lago Accord. Now, I wish I'd come up with it, but I didn't. You know who did? The nominee for the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. So Trump's nominee for that role. He put this paper together. Let's say the name of the paper, and he's got all the details about this plan. He doesn't talk about, well, not all of them, but a lot of them are in here. It's a user's guide to restructuring the global trading system, which he published in November of last year. So between Howard Lutnick saying very clearly how they can use the sovereign wealth fund, between this guy, Stephen Biran, in this report, they lay out a lot of what the plan is. And so tariffs are the cudgel to try and get people to participate, to come to the table, to negotiate these, the value of exchange of currency between one another. Um, they've been very clear about what's going to happen, I think.
Why do you think that they're? I mean, it's out in the open, but why is anyone paying attention to this or talking about it?
Well, because if the market gets wind of it,
When you say the market, Matt, like the retail investors, because
yeah, I
the
mean,
people at the
resale.
top, not to cut you off, but the people at the top have to know what's going on.
I think that people are unsure about what Trump is doing with these. I think that him being the wild man actually really helps in this because he's not sort of totally telegraphing his moves. I mean, this is why he explains things with fentanyl. We're just going after fentanyl. So, do I think that some people are aware of it? Yeah, like China, who's been accumulating gold, apparently, according to Goldman Sachs, 10 times their official numbers. They're buying it hand over fist. So I think there are definitely people that are pre-positioning for this, but it's definitely not retail, that's for sure. But there's going to be a lot of smart money that gets caught up in this pension fund, smart money. Let's say big money, pension fund money, things like that. And because of the two-tiered system, they have to contain the capital in some way. They have to keep capital from fleeing to places where it's not going to get inflated away.
So the pension fund, for example, that could get just absolutely decimated from this.
Well, everything's going to get inflated away. So the pension fund, the hope is that the stock market doesn't get really crushed in this, but 40% of the total equity market is foreign dollars right now. Okay. So what they want to do is they want to make it, believe it or not, it sounds counterintuitive. They want to make it so the dollar is perceived as way less valuable to foreigners, so that foreigners outside of the US do not want to own it, including all of our treasuries. They want interest rates to go up on those. They want those bonds to get hurt in this process. They want it because they have to devalue the dollar. They have to devalue it. So they have to make it unappealing. And they talk about specific things like make it so foreign owners of US treasuries, they can't tax it by treaty, apparently, but they could charge them a user fee for it. That user fee could be collected along with tariffs in the sovereign wealth fund. It then can be leveraged to engage in the FX markets to basically sell dollars on the foreign markets and buy, the Japanese yen in order to push the price of the yen up in relationship to the dollar to make, again, our exports more attractive to those parties. So yeah, and I mean, if you don't have gold now, you're making a mistake. You need to own some gold. You've needed to own it forever, but you definitely need to own it now because in this process, the gold price will go up a lot. I mean, it's hard to imagine that it gets as high as 21,000. That seems to be the base price if you just, had it, if you priced it according to the total current base money supply. So it could be higher than that.
So okay, I'm going to go back to the inflating away here for a second. So people that are holding dollars, let's say a federal person that's got a pension, do you think it'll trickle all the way down to the state level too? Say a teacher or
How do you mean trickle down to them? I mean, the idea is that they want to capture all the money in the US and make it work, make it get spent. So then it does, so then that would improve, wages would go up. The thing the Fed hates the most, for instance, they do not want wages to go up. They want the stock price to go up, but they want to keep inflation in check so that they can keep wages down. That will be reversed. There will be encouragement for wages to rise along with the general price level.
so okay, so it won't be limited from a federal state. It'll be all included in that to make as much of that as you can to fade away or to evaporate. Right? Am I
Yep.
understanding this correctly?
The truth is household debts, municipal debts, state level debts, federal debts, unsupportable at this point.
It's gone.
All are,
You can't salvage it. It's too far gone.
it's unpayable at the current rate, especially when we don't deliver to the world anything except for dollars and oil, I guess. And that's and weapon systems. I mean, we don't really produce anything that's really in great demand by the world because it's too expensive. So they need to devalue it. So those things are much more valuable on the international markets. whatever we produce.
And for regular people that have no idea about any of this, the impact is going to be in the short term. Things are going to cost a lot more. The value of their assets are going to depreciate.
Assets should still go up. Assets should go up.
Hard assets.
Hard assets, yeah. I mean, I can even make an argument that the stocks could go up in this. The problem is that how exactly they handle the foreign ownership of stocks. Like if they scare the foreign holders of U.S. stocks, they could flee the market. So they want to make it so it's a bad idea so that people do not want to have the dollar, but they do not want to give up their U.S. stocks. And they could do this by making it so that they can't sell, or there's restrictions on selling, or there's a fee for selling or something like that. They could do it with a stick, or they could do it by, making sure that they feel confident that's protected somehow, and that they can benefit from this booming stock market. But asset prices will go up. But the key is that so should the productive capacity of the U.S., because they will demand investment. I mean, like China does. China says, if you earn all this money from exporting your products overseas, that money's got to come back and it's got to be reinvested in China. Imagine that. Imagine, as an industrial policy, if U.S. companies that basically, as Paul Craig Roberts says, have been the chief beneficiaries of globalism, not Americans, that they, who have offshored stuff, were required to now repatriate their profits and deploy them in building productive capital in the U.S., how different the world would be if they'd done that. I think they're going to do that.
So how does the crypto and the team that he's formed around that, with the meme coins and David Sachs, explains to me like I'm five, Matt. How does that play into all this, if at all?
I hate to say it, I just think the meme coin was a money grab. It's unbelievable this would happen at that level. I mean, it's so wrong, but I think that's all that was. I think that the role of crypto in the future is that when we get to the right point in this economic reset that we're going to have coming out of the Mar-a-Lago Accord, that we will have a CBDC. And I think that CBDC will not be delivered by a central bank. In fact, I think they'll end the Fed, actually. I think the Fed will be a major scapegoat in all these problems, and it will be destroyed. And instead, you'll have a private stablecoin like Tether. So the banking interest will still be protected by it, but the central bank is quite possibly going to be eliminated in all this. And so I think you'll have we'll all be on CBDCs at the end of it, but it's possible that could be backed by gold, which is a big positive.
And the idea of ending the Fed is going to, just that line will excite people.
Hell, I've been cheering for it forever. Like these people need to go. I mean, they're a disaster. So I totally get it. But I think that now things have just run their course enough that something big has to change. I mean, something on the order of like in 1933, where gold was taken from Americans and then devalued, or then the dollar was devalued in relation to it. I think we're in like 1933 times. And speaking of that time, I mean, one of the things they did as part of that is there was the Buy America Act of 1933. It's like, no. If you work for the U.S. government, you need to buy stuff from Americans, not stuff from overseas. Like this is the zeitgeist we're in again. And I think all that's coming back. And none of this is totally new. I'd say the one thing that's very different is that usually when capital controls are implemented by countries, it's because the country is having a difficult time of sustaining. They're trying to keep their currency up. So like in Argentina, when they still have capital controls, it was to keep all the money from fleeing into dollars and basically making the peso worth less and less. In this case, capital controls will be there for the opposite. They will be there to try and weaken the currency and to support an industrial policy like China's. Like so many of the things that I think if you look at the way China's economic system is, there are so many lessons that I think are going to be applied to what comes out of the US. Now, that has been good for the standard of living and for the average Chinese, but it's been really bad for those who had assets and wanted to protect, wanted to get them out of the country, wanted to use them internationally or anything like that.
This is absolutely incredible, but yet so few people are speaking about this.
I
What,
think these things go unnoticed. Like this Howard Lutnick, I'll send you the link for it, and you should watch it. Actually, he says very clearly what they're going to do with the sovereign wealth fund, and it's when I saw it, I was like, well, this is the most interesting idea I've ever seen. I'm not saying I'm like a don't like the government, private property is the thing, government should not exist kind of guy. Like, so, but I can look objectively at it and go, that's a totally novel idea, which does change the dynamics of the problem that we face incredibly. And then you look at this Miran paper, and he's very explicit about the plans. I mean, I'll give you that too, a link for that, so you can put it in the video if you want, if people want to go and read the paper. It's a little dense, but I mean, it's all in there. It's all in there.
again, after talking to you for a little over 30 minutes about this right now, it doesn't sound bad to me. So what is the downside? I mean, you touched on other countries might not want to participate. List for me
Well,
what.
we're going to get, I mean, a trade war is possible out of this. One of the things that they plan to do, it's articulated very clearly in the Miran paper, is that in order to get countries to come to the table, they're going to threaten tariffs and also use the security umbrella, basically threats of war or non-war, essentially, to get countries to participate. I mean, they think of it as the security umbrella. Now, the positive of that is that you might be able to really work a deal with China where China agrees to bolster their currency, allow the US to devalue in relation to it, and establish lines of peace, like clear lines of peace between, what the US will do and what the US will not do. We're just going to stay away from Taiwan. We're not going to try and fight you in the Pacific or whatever. I mean, the Monroe Doctrine, this is our sphere, that's your sphere, that's fine, as long as you increase the value of your currency in exchange with ours. So that could lead to peace, I think, and that's possible. But it could also lead to war. It's certainly a trade war before this. And the trade war could cause lots of carnage in the meantime. Lots of carnage. And in the adjustment period with all of this, I think it could be, there will be winners and losers in it. But I think, do I think that the situation for assuming they can actually thread this needle, which will not be easy to do, but if they can do it, do I think that my kids at my age, will be better off than they are? Then, yeah, I think that they could be. I think it could actually work out so that it's better for America. But clearly, what we're doing is fucked. It doesn't work. Like everyone knows, everyone's getting poorer every day, unless you own a lot of assets, and then you're getting richer every day. But it's all fake. Everyone knows.
Is the overview of all this, like Doge and exposing, and now the talk of Ron Paul, putting Ron Paul's name to auditing the Fed, the theatrics, the threats and circus, like is all of this to really get the masses to be like, we're fucked?
No, I think it's. I think they have to. I think there's clearly a real fight that happens between whether it's factions at the top or it's just all these entrenched interests in keeping it the way it was. Those have to be rooted out for you to have renew the economic system, whether you believe it'll be better or worse on the other side. For these people whose rice bowl is going to be broken by these changes, it is worse. In the short term, it's clearly worse for them. So they want to stop that if they can. And I think Doge doing what it's doing, exposing all these people, like cutting off the funding for these networks that, would object to these changes, I think is really critical. I don't think it's for show or to make people. I think it's actually, if anything, among the Trump supporters and even people who are on the fence, it validates the things that Trump is doing. It's like they were using our money for what? And we can't, and yet that, now in 5 days, they closed 80% of the open FEMA projects in North Carolina. They could have done this whole time, but they didn't. Instead, we're sending money all over the world to fund media outlets and to fund color revolutions. I mean, this is insane. So I think it's revealing the way things really work, which when, Americans wonder why their standard of living is being reduced, but it's so complicated and so confusing they can't really understand it. There's a boiling frog syndrome. But these revealing these facts makes it clear. And I think it certainly enlists them in support for what must be done, including some temporary hardship that must be endured to get through it.
Why is he taking this on, in your opinion, in these 4 years? Is the can are we at the end of the road, Matt, or
I think we are. I think we're at the end of the economic system. There's either this happens. This is the great thing. I honestly, and like, I'm not a Trump fan. I don't vote. I would definitely vote for him over Kamala if I were going to vote. But the best thing I've seen, and I can't even believe I'm speaking so positive like this. It's as though they're just doing the adult thing. Like if you have a problem and you know it's there and you aren't going to try and tackle it, you're a child. If you see it and you just are just going to take the actions you can to try and resolve it, that's the adult thing to do. And like the last administration clearly they were children. I mean, they were just trying to get one last giant grift, that would get them through the dark times when the collapse came. And the collapse will come. It'll come through an orderly restructuring, or it'll come through total chaos. And I think that they're trying to do the adult thing, just what any responsible adult will do, and get it done. And I think that if it were just Trump, I wouldn't buy it. But Scott Bessent, this Treasury Secretary, is a sober and serious person who has no reason to do something like this. No reason. Why would he subject himself to this public role unless he believed that that the transition over was worth it? And I think there's a lot of serious people that have signed on because of that. And I think you could argue Elon Musk is the same thing. It's because they bought into that and they realized that something must be done, or it's going to come out of everyone's control. So I think that's what they're trying to do. And now I think you can make the case that what's on the other side is, not necessarily great. You have an AI-run government, and you've got a central bank digital currency, and maybe this is the great reset that Klaus Schwab warned us about. I don't know, maybe, but I do think that something must be done. And if I were, if anyone who's acting like an adult would try and tackle this problem directly, and it seems like that's what they're doing.
well, it seems like there's a civil war going on at the top right now, right? And that's what occurred last year, and it might still be going on. But you had, and this is what I thought. I'm gonna share this with you. Maybe I already did, but Elon and Peter Thiel and that whole PayPal mafia, is that really WEF 2.0?
It could be.
And what were the casualties from that? The George Soros, the Klaus Schwabs, all the people on the other side. Because, like you said, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose here. So were these people that got behind the MAGA movement, said, all right, we're building the instruments here. What do we need, Klaus Schwab and the sort? We don't need any of that.
Yeah, it is possible that this gets us to that same place, but in a different way. But at the same time, something must be done anyway. Something must be done. So I don't think that we can. I think you should be aware of that potential dystopian problem in the future, but recognize the fact that something must be done. Something. And if it's not addressed, then it's going to be a disaster for everyone involved. And so, I support all this. Like, I'm concerned about it. I'm an American. I live outside of the U.S. I mean, I have I'll be an Uruguayan citizen hopefully within the next year. But I have family and assets in the U.S. and I'm still considering myself an American. But it's going to affect me for sure, because I do believe that capital controls are coming along with this. And, whether or not, how exactly I position myself, I think makes a big difference. But ultimately, I think that something must be done in the U.S. That we need good jobs. We need some spirit again, and not spirit to go, spend $30,000 for tickets for the Super Bowl and support the team, raise the flag and all that stuff, but a spirit of of some dignity and some direction that people can get behind. Not something that's all rah rah, but like some practical basics. And I do think that Doug always says he has all kinds of problems with Trump, but he says at least he's a cultural conservative. There's some, I mean that he still likes the, leave it to Beaver kind of idea of America, where there's some wholesomeness to it. And I don't know if that's true, but I'd like to believe it's true. And certainly America would benefit from having that. And then encased in that is like a sense of dignity and purpose that is lost in America today, which is why I think Americans are they're willing to endure hardship now. They're willing to do it if it serves a purpose. And I think that eventually they'll have to make this clear, the plan to people, assuming I'm right about this. Well, assuming not that I'm right, but Howard Lutnick is right, and that Stephen Moran is right, and that Scott Bessent is right. Assuming that they're right, then they'll make the plan clear at some point to some people or to the American people, and I think Americans will support it, just as they got behind FDR. And which the problem with that is that could be an entire reordering of the way the U.S. government operates. FDR totally changed the relationship between citizens and the state in a way that I don't think America benefited from. And hopefully it gets guided in a better direction. But I think there will be a totally renewed relationship between Americans and their government.
Well, and that's what I said earlier. Not that I meant it was for show with Doge and all that, but it's exposing and getting the general public behind that a change must be made.
And not only that, but they can execute radical changes quickly. Things that people thought couldn't be done, they're able to do it. I mean, I thought it was impossible everyone talks, there's been reporting forever about how these USAID programs were involved in shenanigans around the world. I mean, this is not like a totally new idea. And yet none of it ever gets to the surface enough, to public consciousness enough, and no one does anything about it. And so for these things to come to the surface and they go, nope, we're not spending money on that anymore. That's gone. It's like a miracle. I mean, that's literally moving mountains. I mean, that's the kind of thing that gets America to support him.
Has this exceeded your expectations, what we've witnessed? It feels like he's been in office for a year already.
Well, it's totally exceeded my expectations. Yeah, totally exceeded my expectations because I think that the team he's got around him have a plan. And I think until this is just within the last 3 weeks that it's become this what I'm describing to you as to what I think is going to happen has become clear to me, which was again made possible because of the gold movement. That is a central, the two sort of foundational things that have to happen for this to work structurally is you got to have the U.S. gold inventory actually in the U.S. so it can be, they can do an inventory, they can audit it, and they know it's there. And secondly, you got to set up the sovereign wealth fund. Sovereign wealth fund is up, gold is coming in. Tariffs are clearly already being used as a threat and as in practice. Those sort of prerequisites to shape the environment are done. And I think that now it's clear that this is the path that they're actually following. So you see these actions combined with what these advisors in the inner circle of the Trump administration are saying on the economic front makes it pretty clear that they're serious and they have a plan. So yeah, I'm really impressed by what they've done so far. And you don't even have to agree with it to respect an adult, to respect that adults are trying to take some responsibility. Now, the thing that I don't like, and I understand why I can't do it, is they don't level with the American people or about everything at first. They have to, if you're trying, they have to herd cats, so they have to support, they have to manage PR. They can't, if they can't tell them they're going to devalue their dollar by 90%, I mean, they can't do these things and have anyone and still have their support in doing it. So I wish that there was a world where they could be more transparent about that, but I just don't think it's possible for them to. But other than that, I mean, who can complain? I mean, I don't like, obviously, I have some specific issues that I don't like about what Trump is doing, but say 95%, you look at it and you go, that's impressive.
What are the things you don't like he's doing right now?
Well, the whole Gaza thing is insane,
Oh, yeah.
totally insane. It's like yeah, it doesn't jive with any of, if you, and this is the problem with Trump is he has no philosophical core. You know, he's a deal maker. He's good at creating value through doing deals. That, especially with the sovereign wealth fund, will actually prove fruitful, I think. In negotiating with other countries, I think it'll be really useful. But not having a philosophical core, something goes, no, this is where I should tell myself no, this is where I should draw a line, makes it so that he could do things like in Gaza and other places where it lacks, any philosophical framework, I think, to do it.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Gaza for a second. I mean, you've got first of all, I can't believe there's 1.7 or 1.8 million people who still live there after what they've endured since
They can't
October.
leave. They can't leave though. So that's why they're still there.
How are they still alive though? That's what, I mean. Is that many people still alive?
Well, only because the most moral military in the world was attacking them, apparently.
Well, and he's talking about moving them like they're just going to jump on a bus or get on a plane and just go. These people, they're born into fighting. You, this is what they know.
Yeah. Oh well, I mean they're born into conflict, at least. But all of everybody probably wants a better life for their children. And I think if they're offered that, I think a lot of them would take it. So I think a lot of them would be excited about it. But still, just the idea is like, what's he's going to buy? He's committed to buying it and owning it. Well, who are you going to buy it from exactly? Who are the sellers? The sellers, the Gazans, all of them? Are you going to divide it equally? What about, I mean, it's like it just basically is wiping away to me the concept of private property or, sovereignty. But when you don't have any philosophical base, like these ideas can make perfect sense to you. It's like, no, we'll just write a check and, we'll move them to Ireland. There's a Palestinian enclave in Ireland, and why wouldn't they want to go there? And, we'll finance their welfare there. I mean, it's crazy actually, but whatever. Yeah, I don't like to dwell on that idea too much but it shows you what's possible in a thinking without a philosophical framework. Where I worry about the realignment or the total change in the relationship between citizens and the state, that sort of thinking can show itself in other ways in America that we'll find objectionable and Americans could find objectionable, but on the whole might go along with.
Yeah, and also, coming back domestically here for a second with the PayPal mafia and, all of these instruments, as long as technology continues to advance, it's inevitable. I mean, we're already in a surveillance state, and the whole idea of a digital currency, in my view, I mean, everybody pays everything with their phones. Now it's to the point where the grocery store you can use your hand over a sensor to pay. Can't do anything without your phones. I mean, everything goes through those devices. So, I mean, in digital currency, I feel like we're pretty much all there.
Yeah, we are. I mean, listen, privacy has been dead for a while. The extent that what you really have to do to actually be private, it's, I guess you got to live off grid somewhere and, I don't know, barter for stuff if you want things to really, what you do to really be private. And, I have to say, and people always get mad if I say anything positive about China. They get really mad. Well, your president is going to model China's system, so don't worry. Say you can be mad at him for that. But I have friends who live in China, and I hear a totally different view from them. The social credit score everyone talks about. They have no knowledge of this. The citizens have no awareness of a social credit score. So if it's used, if it's there, they don't know it's there. But it is a total surveillance state, and they would describe it as efficient and convenient. You can get everything you want on your phone. You can get lots of people using mass transit systems easily. Now, all of that stuff, of course, could be gated and controlled. There could be this dystopian version of it. It's possible that could happen. But it isn't actually the case in China now that these tools are even used that way. Of course, you cannot criticize the government in China. Like that's the red line. You can't. And you know, in America, you can criticize the government. But in terms of the other benefits, they're there. You know, they benefit from all of this much higher form of technology than we use today here. I mean, so it doesn't have to be a dystopian nightmare.
Are there certain countries that the United States will need to buy into this in order to thread this needle?
Everyone that the U.S. has a trade deficit with, everyone that they have a trade deficit with. So China, the EU, Canada, Mexico. I mean, the U.S. has a trade deficit with almost everybody. So everyone that the U.S. has a trade deficit with would have to agree with it. The biggest partners are the most important. That makes China really important. It makes Mexico and Canada really important, along with the EU. Those are the big trading groups that will have to increase the value of their currency in relation to the U.S. dollar in order for the whole system to work.
What about Russia?
I mean, Russia's not a trading partner of the U.S. in any great way. I mean, they do supply with some, you know, uranium, for instance, up until recently, which is very important, especially because we have the same time as all of these other things are going on. This AI boom is real, and it's real. And the AI boom actually is a gigantic promise of massive increases in productivity that will lead to lots of job loss, but allow for the creation of things that we can't imagine today. I mean, the only things that have pulled humans out of poverty is the only thing really is technology. Technology. I mean, the wheel is technology, right? So these things, you know, makes it so that there's like I was on my, you know, I have a ranch here in Uruguay, and there's many things that I would like to do on the ranch, but you look at it and you go, it's not really worth it. It's not really worth it because of the cost, or it's not really worth it because of the labor to do it, which comes by cost. It's not really worth it. But if all of a sudden everything that I really wanted to do in the world were 10% of the cost because of technology, I could have a robot do it. I could have, you know, whatever. I would definitely do it. And so there's all kinds of new wealth that gets created. There's productivity gains that are all derived from technology. And the reason that there's such a big focus on building these data centers throughout the US, which are unbelievable what they're building, actually, the huge amount of capital invested by the tech companies is unbelievable, actually, in these things, is because the promise of it is so massive. It will lead to job losses. I mean, I think like the white collar job today, which has been like, you know, go to college, get a degree, you know, go into finance or some profession, some white collar job of some kind. That it is today the equivalent of what the small farmer was in 1870 in America. In 1870 in America, the surest sign of financial independence, you know, was having a small scale farm. And those today, I mean, 1% of Americans are farmers. It was like 57% of the whole labor force was on small scale farms in 1870. I think white collar jobs are going to go the way of the dodo bird. They won't exist. They'll be gone far before the, you know, manual labor, the physical jobs will be gone. But and that will cause unbelievable disruption. But at the same time, it makes possible things that are not possible today. And you know, I mean, out of the Industrial Revolution in the U.S., you get, of course, you know, you get skyscrapers, you get highways, you get all the consumer products that we enjoy today, the time-saving things. You know, you get an electrified country, you get urban design and planning, you get theater, you get cinema. I mean, these things all came out of the Industrial Revolution. Like whole industries that you couldn't imagine before, that literally couldn't possibly exist, come out of that massive productivity increase. And AI does promise that. And as long as the capital is not just stripped away from America, but is reinvested in America, like what China has done. The productivity gains that they've gotten there, or the use of technology, which has caused productivity gains, they've forced the reinvestment of that capital in that country, which has massively increased the capital base there, which massively increases the productivity base there and the standard of living of everyone in the country. So it could be, this is not the golden age for America, but I think this future if AI not looked at as a dystopian nightmare scenario, which it could be, but looked at in its productivity enhancement, combined with an industrial policy that doesn't allow all of the benefits to be completely stripped out of the country, would be good for America. Not as good maybe for the rest of the world, but good for America.
If the masses found out right now, so would they put in some type of control so that way you wouldn't be able to pull your money out?
Pull your money out, as in what way?
Move it offshore. Move it offshore. Move it.
I don't think so yet. No, I don't think so yet. But when there starts to be massive capital flight, they will put breakers on. And where you'd probably see that first is in the stock market, where they'd be concerned about. Or they have to start with the big money. So the big money is going to be in the equities market, the corporate bond market. I mean, it's something like 12 trillion in equities that foreigners hold. It's like 4 trillion in corporate bonds. They have 7 point something trillion in U.S. treasuries. So they want the treasuries to go down, though. They want that to go down. They want the dollar to go down. But I can't imagine they really want that stripped from the stock market. So you can imagine if it does get hit, if the people start to run in that way, they might put some brakes on that. But I think more than anything else, they want to make sure that capital gets trapped that is American capital, that gets trapped in the U.S. and is invested in, how do I say this? In inflationary activities that are also productive.
What's the timeline for this?
Well, I think it's going to happen really fast. Within 2 years, I think that there will be a Mar-a-Lago Accord. But it could be sooner than that. I mean, there's this albatross around our neck right now, which is that there's somewhere between $8 and $9 trillion of U.S. bonds, treasuries, notes, et cetera, that mature in this calendar year. So that, I think that that will want to be addressed in some way for this scenario to work well. I'm not sure how they would address it. It's, people think, well, are they going to, they need to keep foreign buyers in it, or something like that. Not necessarily. They want foreign buyers actually to flee these things because they want the currency devalued. They want the dollar to go down. They don't want demand to go up between them. So, but I haven't thought through. I'm not smart enough to understand that, but I do think that this huge amount of money that's going to be matured. That's basically, so people have a bond, let's say it's a 2-year bond. They give the government $1 million, and then they get paid, whatever, they get paid 2% on that. So they'll get a little bit of money every year while they hold it. Then at the end of that time period, when it's mature, they take that bond back and they get the money back. So there's going to be $8 trillion of parties, domestic and international, that are going to be taking dollars back now. Now, the question will be, do they want to intervene in that process in some way? Are they going to use that as a catalyst for these actions? I don't know. That's something I haven't been able to think through enough yet. I need to put some more thought into that. But it seems like it's an opportunity and a risk. And so it seems like that people that are really smart, like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, is factoring this into his calculations. And I'm sure that this Stephen Miron also is well aware of this and has a plan, and might use that as a catalyst.
People are going to listen to this and be blown away, in my opinion. And I just think to myself, for regular 8 to 5, your average person goes to work every day, watches fantasy football, Desperate Housewife. What I don't even know if that's a show's on anymore, but the blissfully unaware, their life is going to change dramatically when this really takes a hold.
Yep, I think so too. And I think that just got to think it's like FDR time. It's just going to be like, but people will be enlisted in the effort. I think when it really starts to become obvious to everybody, and will be supportive of it broadly. But I do think that people will be really smart to get some gold between now and then. It's still, it's $2,900 an ounce, which seems high to me, but I think it can go a lot higher from here. And the idea is that gold isn't going to go up. The dollar is going down. And it's intentional for the dollar to go down. By holding on to some gold, they will preserve some purchasing power through this whole mix. And so that preservation of purchasing power can really make the difference in, families that are trying to navigate what's coming. So I think if you should go get some, and just get, you just want to get basic bullion. You don't want to get these collectible coins. You just want to have some physical gold.
What were your thoughts when Trump was talking about getting rid of the penny? Does that play into any of this at all?
I mean, it makes sense. It's totally uneconomic to produce it, for the government to produce it. Inflation has basically made a penny worth nothing. I mean, when we were kids, we could still go to the convenience store and there's penny candy around, right?
5 cent gum.
They had
Oh,
five
that
cents.
was a
It's five
nickel,
cents
but
for bigger stuff. It's 5 cents for bigger stuff, but they'd have a couple things like a Tootsie Roll you get for a penny still when I was a kid, but so it has no value. I mean, if it was just, see a penny, pick it up all day long, you have good luck. I'm not sure I would bend over for a penny anymore. Who cares?
what about I mean, the cost of food, the cost of just living? So that's all gonna skyrocket.
It'll go up. The hope is that there's wages start to move upward to offset those costs. That's the hope. And it will not, it won't go all in the same direction. I mean, it will go in the same direction, but it will not happen in a smooth fashion. So, at the same time, you also have the issue of job losses from AI. So it's going to be a wild time. I'm not sure how they're going to handle it, but yes, costs are going to go up because the value of your dollar is going to go down. Hopefully wages offset that in a substantial way.
Yeah, my concern with it would be the fragility of the system, right? Because once this thing really gets going, this is where the negatives come from social media, whatnot, right? You're going to be able to put information out to scare people, and people still don't use common sense and critically think, in my opinion. Although I've done, not that I'm the smartest guy in the room, but you know, how much worse would 2008 have been had you had X and all these social media apps to be able to send out information, transmit it so quickly. So now with this, you could have people with big enough audiences that are just against Trump or against this whole agenda, put out information and just scare people.
Yeah, it's true. Although, if they do this proactively, they're at lower risk of having a runaway, financial situation like we had in 2008. So that's why I think they're trying to be proactive about it. But you're right. It could be, yeah, certainly that could be taken that way, and that is an issue. But yeah, I think broadly Americans are ready for it if it can be explained as it's difficult, but it's for the right reasons. And people see, America winning, America doing the right thing. Our government is actually not against us. They're actually, doing things that are in our interest. I think they can sell it that way. And if they can, then I think most people will support it. And there will be stopgap measures, that will be put in place. There'll safety nets, that will have to be out there for people that like, I think that I mean, they've been talking about UBI for a long time. I think that there will be some form of that or some additional form of, unemployment insurance for people who lose jobs in it. I think there will be some effort to try and address those things. it's not going to be easy for anybody, but I do think this is coming. I think the devaluation is unavoidable. It's either, we have it's unavoidable. It can be managed better or worse. And I think that they're actually sincerely trying to do it in the best way possible. So I think that people should feel better about that, but you should not rely on the government to take care of you or anyone else. It's all about you accepting responsibility totally for your life. If you have some assets today, if you have a little bit of money and a little nest egg put away, it's you only stocks, I would take a percentage of that. Not that I can offer financial advice, but if it were me, I would take a percentage of that and I would buy gold with it instead.
Do you anticipate the possibility of a bank run from this?
I don't think so. I don't think you get a bank run. I mean, the big issue, you're just going to have dramatically more government involvement in the markets. So, like they can change accounting rules that make it so that a bank doesn't have to recognize it's bankrupt. You know, I mean, there are things that can be done to make it. I mean, if they had, they suspend mark to market on certain things at different times. Certainly, banks right now don't have to recognize the losses that they have from the bonds that they're holding. Like that's, if they did, then they'd all be bankrupt. This whole fiat money system is all fake and can be, and you're dealing with a completely fake and fabricated system. Keeping that fake and fabricated system uh, up, as long as you have guards on the large capital flows. This is why I think capital controls are very important. Are going to come, and we're going to see these things as soon as this starts to rear its head. Then I think that they can gate the capital and keep it so that you don't, they have bank holidays, right? It's to keep the run on banks from happening. So these things can be rolled out very quickly. They freeze things in place so no one has to recognize bankruptcy, and they can keep working through it. So I think that there are ways around it.
What about how if any would the Great Taking would that play a part in all this?
Yeah, that's a big issue. I haven't really thought about how that could affect in it, but if you if you believe in a world where there are these different factions, there's the globalist faction, and then there's whatever else the other faction is. Klaus Schwab being in the globalist faction, Biden being, basically a dupe of that faction, maybe. Then I think then you can make an argument that that the faction that's in charge now is not the globalist faction, and that they, by essentially walling off the U.S. economy from other countries or putting up barriers between it and others, that they might be protecting it from some of that. It's possible from those actions, but it's certainly if you had a scenario where you have a flight of capital of foreigners outside of the U.S. stock market, that would trip breakers in all kinds of ways, and would certainly create a framework where um, these basically the people who really control the stock, that these I can't remember what David Webb calls them, these entities, but the DTC is the one in the U.S. This is where the custodian really of the stocks, that they could go bankrupt and that they could basically take everyone's assets for collateral. So you can imagine that if there's a huge run in the stock market and some deleveraging of some kind, that could have a knock-on effect where that could happen. It's quite possible. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the Trump administration is trying to thread a needle. And I don't know if they'll be successful, but I do think that they've laid out what the plan is. And I think there's time for people to take actions to protect themselves from these various things. And one of them, I mean, to offset the risk of the Great Taking is, again, having not all of your assets in the stock market, but having a percentage in physical gold or real stuff around you, things you would use, instead of it's paper wealth.
What does your gut tell you if this is if in fact this is the plan and this is what's going to occur, the success level or the likelihood?
Well, threading the needle perfectly, I think you're probably a 10% chance of doing it perfectly. But I think getting it directionally correct is quite possible. I think it is possible. I think the plan makes sense. But the question is, would Americans really accept it? If you can get Americans on board with the change, and I think that my concern is the relationship between people and the government, that changes fundamentally, that changes the nature of America fundamentally in order to shift this economic system. You can look to China and see what they have done with their approach. If the US models an approach like that, which it seems to me, they will never say that it's the Chinese approach, but you'll see some of the things that China has used applied in America, and you can't argue that they were much more effective than what we've done over the same time frame.
What last question, what would some of these other countries that say we don't have trade deficits with, how will they respond to this? They're not going to just sit idle like Russia.
Well, if we don't have trade deficits, then it shouldn't affect them.
Hmm.
And in fact, you can come out of these things with because a lot of the things that turn into war are actually economic disputes that kind of go out of control. So, I mean, the reason that, China bombed Pearl Harbor was because we were choking them off from oil. It was an economic issue that's made them lash out, which we knew about in advance, but whatever. It caused that. So these economic problems become the basis of war more often than anything else. And I think that if you can have a negotiated truce to economic difficulty, which might cause some economic bombs to be thrown first through tariffs and trade war, through seizing of assets of foreigners. I mean, the Tesla Gigafactory in China, if this gets bad, they could take it. I mean, there's a lot of things like that that could happen. I mean, I think that the U.S. has been, all pissy about the Panama situation, which is operated by zero Chinese people, and China has no special rights. They just have the lease on the port facilities there, which they operate effectively for everyone who uses the canal. They could demand those assets be taken, be taken from the Chinese, for instance. There are ports that are controlled in the U.S. that are owned by Chinese companies, or in great part by Chinese companies, so they could take those assets from them. So there's lots of disruption that could occur, but I think there'll be economic slings and arrows rather than us, sending in, sending Marines to fight somewhere, which I think is a better scenario overall. But yeah, it's going to be wild. I mean, actually, this is fucking exciting as hell, what's going on right now. And the fact that someone is being an adult, and that's all you can really ask of a man, actually, is to be an adult and take responsibility for the role that they've got. And it does seem that Trump is doing that right now. Hopefully he hasn't sold his soul, and it's not going to take us to some dystopian future, but he's certainly taking responsibility, which I appreciate.
How long do you think it would take to get on the other side of it if in fact it is successful? Would it be beyond Trump's term?
Yes. For it to be successful, yes. But I think you could come out of, certainly the Mar-a-Lago Accord will happen way before Trump leaves office. I think it'll happen within the first 2 years. And that'll be the basis of the trade relationships of the countries involved, the relevant countries. And, that relationship will stick beyond Trump's term. So I think that, and especially if you set up this sovereign wealth fund the way they plan to do it, as an active participant in the economy, which you can make an argument that many arguments that that's bad, but then you get these things institutionalized and not so driven by a cult of personality. And it does seem like these institutional changes are possible with a combination of what Doge is doing and the sophistication and forward-thinking nature of some of the people that are surrounding Trump now.
Where can people find you, Matt?
Best place people can find me is I do a podcast with the legendary Doug Casey called Doug Casey's Take. You can find that on YouTube. We also publish a newsletter at crisisinvesting.com. We do provide investment recommendations. So if you're interested in how we're investing during all this, you can go to crisisinvesting.com and sign up for that. We're really big into resource companies right now. Well, Doug's always been big into resource companies, but that's our focus because these resource companies, which are incredible, unlike NVIDIA, which is super expensive, these resource companies are really cheap. And for the industrial future we have, the not just the industrial, but the AI future we have, those two things together, demand on these resources is going to go up a lot. I mean, copper alone, they expect that they, for the next 20 years, have to mine more copper than has ever been mined in human history. I mean, the demands on this are great. So there's going to be wealth building opportunities in all this, and there's going to be chaos. You got to protect yourself. There's going to be opportunities, but it actually is an exciting time, and it's certainly it's not a golden age. I'm not going to get on that boat, but I will say that it's the dark, the dark winter approach of Biden at least has passed for now.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible time, especially to be talking about all this, and it's changing so rapidly too that it just provides more opportunities for more of these types of conversations.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's lots of good. I mean, a lot of what the ideas that I have come from listening to other people talk. I mentioned this Howard Lutnick. I was just listening to a podcast last year and where he outlined the sovereign wealth fund, and so that planted a seed in my mind from then. So it's great conversations. I mean, podcasts have been a great tool for me to understand what's happening in the world, and hopefully this is helpful to some people. And I could be completely wrong about all this. Might not be the plan. It could just be a wild man making crazy threats to other countries around the world for tariffs. That's quite possible. But hopefully people found this useful.
Your social media on X too? Did you say that already?
Yeah, it's Mattpheus, Mattpheus.
As always, thanks for doing this. Thank you for all your support. I appreciate it.
Oh,
Always.
yes, one more thing. Hold on. People do not appreciate the work you do enough. Mike has started to ask for support at the beginning of his videos, which I think I bullied him into because this guy is my favorite podcaster out there, and he's got to make a living. And if you don't support him, he will go away. He'll have to go get a job in the new economy. Maybe become a prompt engineer for AI, or I don't know, who knows. But he'll have to go get a real job, and that would suck. So we'd all lose out. So last time I was on, I think I said I would contribute $500 to you. I will do so again, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to make everyone listening feel very guilty. If you got any value out of this conversation, you don't give Mike money, the karma is going to be a bitch for you. So if you got value, give some money to Mike.
Matt, I appreciate it. I appreciate one, these conversations, but two, the friendship that you and I have developed over the last year and a half. I mean, we talk offline as well. And I think I even said we shouldn't talk offline anymore because these conversations are so good that I want to go back and reference them and other people to be able to hear them. So
I appreciate the relationship too, Mike. You've been a good friend. And this is one of the great things about this is you actually meet great people and you form relationships that you never would have had in the normal world. So yeah, no, it's been great.
Last question. What's the book Maxim and
Oh, yeah. So Doug Casey and I, and along with my son, who's 19, have been working on a book called The Preparation. It's basically what a young man should do instead of misallocating his 4 years of the best years of his life and a lot of money to go into university. And I would say the book is now 95% done. Doug is filling in some parts. I have one chapter I need to finish, but we are on the cusp of it. So it will be out, pretty soon. And my son has been the beta tester in all of this. For the last over a year, he's been doing what we suggest he do instead of, again, going to college. And he's had a lot of remarkable adventures on the whole journey. He's learned a lot, and I'm biased, but the truth is that he's just not the same kid he was a year ago. I mean, it's made him a man, actually, in 1 year already. Right now, he is somewhere off the Falkland Islands on this big schooner sailboat, learning to sail, with, according to Matt Bracken, one of the best high latitude captains anywhere in the world. So these are the kind of things he's doing instead, and he's learning about lots of things, just how the world works. And anyway, it's a much better approach for young people. He gets a part of a hero's journey, and which young people want badly, young men do absolutely certainly, while at the same time learning way more than you would ever learn in a classroom. Still getting on the classical studies and the academic portion of it, but by doing shit in the real world. I mean, it's been remarkable for him, and our hope is put it in a book and make it something that is transportable and duplicable by other people. So that's the idea.
I can't wait to. I can't. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying it's right there. It's so close to being done now.
So when do you think it'll be out?
Doug is the slow person here, so I think, there's some logistics stuff because we're self-publishing it so that it can get out quickly. We haven't even tried to talk to a publisher, even though Doug's had some books published with major publishers in the past, because the timeline is too long. But it's quite possible it could be out in 30 or 45 days. I would say, certainly within 60 days, I would definitely want it to be out, but it could be sooner.
I can't wait to read it.
Thanks.
That could be the format to me. That could be the format for young men in the future. That book could be the Bible for young men in the future.
That's the goal. The fundamental promise of the book is to help a young man become competent, confident, and dangerous. Those are the things we want to do. I mean, and confidence comes from knowing who they are, and actually having experience in the world. Competence comes from actually learning things and learning to not just intellectual things, intellectual ideas, although those are all there, but practical, physical things. And becoming dangerous is, of course, about defending yourself and protecting people you love, but it also means like not falling victim to narratives. I mean, what's the most dangerous thing to an out of control government? I think we saw this in the Biden administration. It's true believers who couldn't think for themselves, couldn't act for themselves. I mean, a truly dangerous man is a man who can think for himself more than anything. So that's the target with the book. That's the goal, what we're trying to do with it. It's to provide a guide where young men can get to that level. So far, Max is just crushing it. I mean, he did a great job.
Yeah, he's unbelievable. What I know we were wrapping up, but last question with him. What after sailing, do you know what would be next?
Yeah, he's going back to the U.S. The current plan is he's going to take private pilot lessons in Alaska. He's going to spend the summer fighting wildfires again to earn some money. Yeah, because this whole thing, it can be, people look at it and go, oh, that's so expensive. It could be expensive to do all those things. Well, there's some of these cycles, some of the 3-month cycles is the way it's broken down. Some of them are more expensive, like the private pilot one is the most expensive one. But the truth is that Max has today more money than he did when he started this more than a year ago. I had a little nest egg for him, not much, but he has more today than he did when he started because there's a way to create value along the way, to earn money along the way, and he's been doing it.
Yeah, I love what Matt Bracken was saying about the soup kitchen. I was talking about that. That was another thing. You're like, wow,
yeah. It can be really. I mean, one of the cycles in the book is actually going to Italy and going to a cooking school in Florence is one of the things. So it's not the same as like doing that mass stuff that Bracken was talking about, but it certainly gives people a skill set, and they get to experience one of the best cities in the world for a period of time while they're learning.
The other thing too is, you with this book and towards a young man, I wonder, what would be the equivalent of this for a young female, a young girl?
It's coming. I mean, the reason this book got written is because, Doug's been wanting me to write this book with him for more than a decade, and I had zero interest in doing it at all, but just because it didn't matter. But when my son got to 18, it became a real practical problem that I wanted to help solve. So it's written because I wanted to help my son, and my daughter's 17. So I have to come up with I want to give her the same sort of thing that is geared toward her.
Have you thought about a template or some type of formula?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it. It's harder for me to intuitively grasp as a man. I have a harder time I understand like a young man wants a hero's journey. A young man wants to do stuff, and they don't do stuff because they're afraid, and like how you get, I understand these basic mechanics intuitively as a man. It's harder with the girl, but yeah, I can't say I have any real concrete ideas yet, but I can tell you that it's definitely the next challenge to be tackled. It's becoming a big priority for me.
Matt, I always enjoy our conversations, and thanks for doing this, and look forward to the next one.
Thanks, Michael. My pleasure. Thank you.
Mic drop.